I want to talk a bit about taking the knee as a gesture, initiative, symbol, call it what you will. And that's actually kind of the point of this video. It's a polarizing issue. Now, I'm going to be speaking a bit more about the UK situation because this is obviously something that began in the United States about 3, 4, 5 years ago. I can't remember the year of the Colin Kaepernick thing. I think it was 2016, 2017, but it's come over here now. Lewis Hamilton, the Formula One driver, who's arguably the most successful F1 driver of all time, very influential person in the world of sports. He's really pushed this. Um, I've just read an article or an op-ed, I should say, by Simon Kelner in the Eye. I'll just hold this up. This is from the 16th of February. Um, so basically, in this, Simon Kelner is arguing that the Tories, and he's talking specifically about Priti Patel, um, they are distorting what this is. This isn't verbatim, but he's basically saying that they're making some wild claims. For example, linking the Home Secretary linked the rioting by BLM activists, or at least people, um, involved in those protests that BLM didn't exactly denounce. That the unrest last year with taking the knee. Um, well, he's right to say that it's not the same thing. Obviously, it's a bit of a sweeping thing to say that, taking the knee equates to rioting. It's not the same thing. Um, However, I think it is very telling that as soon as Priti Patel criticised Black Lives Matter, she was immediately denounced by the woke left. Um, so really, I think they're in no position to lecture about tolerance. They're really, really not. Um, Kellner makes some valid points, but there's one thing that's critically lacking in his column, and I've written that they might publish my letter, they might not. Um, I'll get the paper tomorrow, see if it happens. It'll be too late to get today's edition. I mean, published. I have had a few. To be fair to them, I have had a few letters published over the years, and the Eye isn't as left wing as the Guardian, so they are more likely to publish dissenting views. However, it's hard not to notice the obvious woke trend that the Eye has been going down in recent years. They started off as a centre left paper. I do think that they, in the last couple of years, have definitely tried to move more to what they see as the progressive left rather than the centre left. Um, but that's just my impression. I don't buy it every day. I quite like it as a paper. I think it has quite a good panorama, for example, of world news. But some of the domestic stories is like bias is very obvious, and that's fine. There's very, very few newspapers that is completely neutral, and I think in a democracy it's healthy to have a left-right balance. I mean, the Sun and the Express and the Mail are, you know, they will be on the other side of things. And actually, when it comes to the print press, the balance is slightly more in favour of conservative or right wing newspapers, with the print press, that is. But anyway, in my letter, I tried to make it short and snappy, more likely to be published. I tried to keep it diplomatic, so I give Kellner some credit. But I hope to publish it. We'll see what happens. If they don't, well, there's this video. Yeah, he just totally ignored the fact, a very important fact. Probably shouldn't say fact, I should say possibility, that we're now going to be in a situation where players, athletes who don't take the knee will be stigmatized. He's ignoring that in his sort of overtures to praise taking the knee as a small gesture. Um, Actually, the title of his article, Taking the Knee is a Clear Signal That Takes Seconds. True. But let's say you have a team of 11 players, I think that's a football team, and let's say nine of them take the knee and two of them choose not to because they just don't feel comfortable doing it. They don't think it's going to necessarily they don't think it'll change racism, or they just don't believe in doing that as a thing, whatever the reason might be. Now, an optimist would say, well, it's just down to individual judgment, and the players who want to do it can, the players who don't want to do it don't have to. But when you get people like Lewis Hamilton who are actively pressuring other athletes to do it, he's not saying you have to do this, but he is actively trying to encourage, i.e., pressure his peers to do so. Now, if an athlete chooses not to do it, if they are black, they will be accused of lacking solidarity with their brothers and sisters. And if they are white, they will definitely be accused of lacking empathy and maybe even accused of being pro racism. That's a danger that could happen. And I don't think it's far fetched. I really don't. Kellner totally failed to address that point. Um, he also failed to consider that the backlash against the Home Secretary, the backlash against Dominic Raab last year, for not going with the mantra of every single thing that Black Lives Matter say and does needs to be supported, um, will attract a backlash. I actually think among the wider public, BLM is quite a controversial organization, but there is still this narrative from the woke left that unless you support them 100%, then you're not an ally. Um, Frankly, I'm so tired of this sort of leftist intolerance. And, I'm not a cheerleader of the right. The right has its own intolerance. You just have to speak to the average hardcore Trump supporter, total lack of critical thinking. It's like Trump is God and that's it. Um, but in the same edition, Yasmin Alibi Brown, who is another regular columnist with the Eye, she has a nauseating article um, denouncing the Education Secretary's move to create free speech in universities. In other words, he's threatened to sue, not sue, to fine student unions. Excuse me, I've been up all night. To fine student unions that don't protect free speech. Now, surely that's a good thing. Surely universities should be protecting free speech. So having some penalties on universities that don't is, I don't see how that's a bad thing. She's arguing that it will silence anti-racism campaigners. It will silence, people who want to talk about slavery. What she is doing there, it's very typical of a lot of leftists, just utterly failing to acknowledge, the double standards of her camp, the left. And I'm using an umbrella term there, but fact of the matter is, especially in universities, it's far, far, far more likely to be left-wing student unions or left-wing motions that demand cancel culture, that demand no platforming, that demand unpopular views are put down. Okay, so I find it a bit galling for a left-wing columnist to claim that it's the left's freedom of speech that's being violated. That's like not, it's just not reality. It's not reality as to what's happening in universities because it's the woke mob that are making demands. It's the woke mob that are demanding people are no platformed and cancelled. Um, she might not like the Conservative Party, which is absolutely her right. There's some things I don't like about the Conservative Party, but to suggest that it's the left's freedom of speech that's under attack is preposterous. It's utterly preposterous. In fact, I only read that article after I'd sent the letter to the Kelner article. I guess I better not send two, otherwise I'll just get on their nerves and they won't publish anything. But, I'm not saying here right is right and left is wrong. There's times I support the left, and I agree with Kellner's point that you can't say taking the knee equates to rioting. But this is where, he's kind of failing to understand why virtue signaling is criticized, because it's not only making these polarizing symbols or gestures, which might well be harmless, but it's a question of forced conformity, and that is very much an issue here. It's something that he fails to recognize, because with virtue signaling, with woke ideology, and I'm using terms, by the way, that they often use themselves, but with these sort of things, it's either agree with us or you're a bigot. They do have a very black and white thinking on things. And Kellner and Yasmin Alibert Brown and others, just when they push their argument about, oh, what's wrong with this? That's usually the opening line that the progressive left take. What's wrong with this? The hysterical right's just playing up. But they don't grasp that there is actually a very real freedom of expression issue at stake here. Maybe not so much with taking the knee, but like I said, what about players who don't want to do that? Um, Ultimately, in the UK context, if I'm looking at the left and the right, very crude generalized terms, I have to say it's the left who are far more likely to be pro censorship, pro no platforming, and pro cancel culture. The right aren't above it, and you'll get right wing equivalents. For example, to use a recent example, that black clergyman who made the controversial comments about Captain Tom. Now, in my opinion, his comments were disgraceful, and it's right that he apologised. But he did apologise, and that there was some on the right demanding that he be sacked and punished and so on. So the right aren't totally above cancel culture either. But in that case, it was pointing out the double standards. If that had been a white clergyman who'd said something about a black public figure, they would immediately have been fired. There's no question about it. Double standards infuriate people. They really do. And for someone like me, who I really, really try hard to hold same standards on both sides, um, it's easy to see the double standards. If you're tribal, if you are a real um, left-leaning person, and you see yourself as really progressive and really woke, and again, that's a self-ascribed term, so I don't necessarily see it as a pejorative. Um, then you're going to be blind to the concept of left-wing bias. You're going to be blind to the sort of issues that you will say, oh, it's not no platforming, it's just not allowing bigots to have a view or bigots to spew their hate. That's how you would see it. And likewise, if you are a really dogmatic right winger, that could be hardline Brexiteer, it could be a real hardline Trump supporter. Everything is a leftist plot, everything is a conspiracy theory, and they're just as bad, in my opinion. But I do think the left overall is more prone to censorship. Of the two sides, I would be more concerned about freedom of speech being violated by the regressive left than the regressive right, but both are a problem. Um, so regarding taking the knee, I'm not offended by it personally, um, but I don't think that players and athletes should kind of be forced into this conformity in order to do it. And I think it's preposterous that someone like Dominic Raab is, I know I've quoted that a few times, but it's a valid example. He gets a backlash because he says he doesn't want to, it seems like an empty gesture. That wasn't his exact words, but, why the hell should anyone be pressured to take it? That's something Simon Kelner and others need to answer.